morning and welcome to the latest episode of the Golfing Society podcast. I have the privilege and pleasure of being with Aston Ward this morning at the Belfry Golf Club. Now, Aston is the Chief Operating Officer for the Confederation of Professional Golf, also known as the CPG, and he's also the Communications Lead for the Golf and Health Project. So today we're going to do a deep dive into golf and health and how we can hopefully spread the word through getting the message out about why golf is such a great game to play for not just the elite level but more people in society. So without further ado, Aston, welcome.
Thank you.
It's great to have you here today.
Absolutely.
For the audience, would you just like to give them a little bit of background into you, your golfing career, your job at the moment, and what you do at the Golf and Health Project?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me on, and hopefully I can share some insights of where we've got to with golf and health over the years. So I've been in golf my whole life. I started playing when I was 5. I was lucky to live across the street actually from a golf course down in Surrey, and I knew from an early age I wanted to be involved in golf in some way. I then knew from a fairly early age of about 16 that I wouldn't make it as a player, so I wanted to go down more of the kind of academic route if I could, and you know, have some sort of role in the sport in some way. And I guess I was sort of fortunate to be where I am in being able to access a degree programme, actually not far from where we are now at the Belfry, at the University of Birmingham, combined with the British PGA, whose headquarters are just not far from us now. And that enabled me to kind of do academic study around sports management, golf management, but also do my PGA stuff at the same time. So I am a proud PGA member. I see myself as a member of that global PGA community, and that has kind of given me a really good footing to have bits and pieces of different involvement in the sport. I've worked primarily in the kind of marketing comms part, but I did coach for a short time. I've worked at a media agency which was actually non-golf but the odd sporting client. I've worked at a club fitting and building place called Precision Golf down in Surrey as well, so done a few different things. But I guess it's about 13 years ago now or something horrendously long, but an opportunity came up to work for, then we were called PGAs of Europe, and at that point we had our office here at the Belfry as well, in fact, and that was working for Ian Randall, and at the time with Tony Bennett, and really as a new role around communications. You know, the role of marketing was becoming more important within our organisation, and also just someone who could, I suppose, do a little bit of everything. Yeah. Jack of all trades, maybe master of none. And that role really has evolved literally over more than a decade now to where I am now, Chief Operating Officer. And I guess to summarise what I do for CPG, it's overseeing pretty much most areas of the business and keeping the wheels turning, keeping the cogs going, making sure activity's happening, making sure the things that is set out in our strategy is delivered as best we can. We're a small team, a modest size, but I always like to think our output is more than more than you might get, a disproportionate output compared to our team size. But the tie into golf and health, and I've always kind of had an interest in this kind of area. My degree thesis, in fact, was around compression clothing and how it has an effect on performance, and I've always kind of had a little bit of a side interest, if you like, in that sports science and technical part of the sport. And that was kind of sitting there whilst I was doing my main role. And then in 2015, maybe even a touch earlier, Dr. Roger Hawkes came to us and to Ian, our chief executive, and had this concept for golf and health. And he'd actually, this is one sort of where the links continue. Our current chairman is a guy called Frank Kirsten. He's the chief executive of the PGA of Holland. Frank had asked Roger to come over to Holland and deliver a talk about performance and how that kind of thing happened. And Roger was like, well, I can actually do a bit about the health benefits of golf, this new thing that we're trying to focus on. And that was the first time I think he'd actually done it publicly and spoken externally to a group of people about the subject. That formulated into then the project itself. And inherently linked into that was Dr. Andrew Murray's PhD study, which was looking at what research is out there about what these benefits are.
Yes.
All kinds of benefits, the mental, the social, physical, all these different areas. And his scoping review, which is really, I'm sure he would be a bit embarrassed for us to say it, but to me that was an absolute game-changing point for golf and health generally, but also actually I think for our sport, because it shifted us from sort of talking a good game to actually having evidence to support that. And not a lot of sports have got that even still, many years down the line as well. And so Dr. Andrew Murray, Dr. Roger Hawkes, they were the trailblazers in this area and have done a fantastic job. And they said to us, we need maybe a little bit of support, bit of communication support as well. Would you be able to do that? And so, I absolutely wanted to do that. And Ian is on the Golf and Health Project board as well. And since then, we've been kind of delighted to see how it's grown. It's really become, the concept has become so strong, so I'd like to think kind of pretty embedded in the sport now. And really, I guess the benefit from our perspective from CPG side has been we have worked really hard to kind of embed that within PGAs and PGA pros and make sure that they are ambassadors for that messaging and they get it and it's part of their learning. We've got a long way to go. There's lots that needs to be done. But that's really what we wanted to do there. And then we've been able to put some energy, some passion, and utilise our network to hopefully play our part in helping that grow. And there's obviously been a huge number of, I won't mention them all because I'll always forget to people, but the World Golf Foundation, which many people will know is people like Augusta National and USGA and
yes.
the RNA put in a lot of effort and money early on to support that. And the RNA more recently have been massive supporters of that and deserve a significant nod for their efforts in the area. And I think we'll probably touch on this in a minute as well, but I think we've at least made significant ground in getting the golf and health message throughout the sport. I think if we went outside now and asked some of the guys and girls that are playing here at the Belfry now, have you heard about some of the health benefits? I think a lot of people would, but I think there's a huge amount more we can and should be doing, both in the UK and also internationally, to really get that out there.
That's a great introduction, that, Aston. And I just want to share with the audience when we first met, and we'd just started as Golfing Society, and we were trialling our first ever dementia golf sessions down in Lincolnshire. And I think you heard a little bit about us, and I shared a bit of information, and then you very kindly came down with Roger Hawkes, and you actually filmed one of our sessions in action. And I have to say that was 2017. That video has helped so much in terms of getting the message out about what we do at Golfing Society. So it seems a while ago, but that was a great starting point to you helping us get the message about what we do at Golfing Society.
Yeah, great. Well, no, I'm glad it had had a positive impact even doing that, and I think that's maybe a good example of what we've tried to do. A little bit of the role from the CPG side within the project is just apply a little bit of knowledge and expertise in certain things to help Roger, to help yourself, to sort of shine a light on things. I mean, I guess from a practical perspective we've been able to do things like that, and then also we have our network, which is 35 member countries, but actually much wider than that around the world, and be able to share a lot of that messaging out there. So hopefully it was useful in a little way, a bit further down the line.
Very, very much so. And we've had 3 international golf and health congresses that we've all attended now. It was a privilege to actually be at the first, then the second, but most recently the third up in Edinburgh. And I think every time I go to one of these conferences, not only do I learn more, but like you've just said, I realise that there's a bit of momentum there, and I think the message is starting to grow. The evidence is definitely growing in terms of why golf is such a great game to play, no matter what challenge you face in life. And I think that from the first Congress to this last one, I think the message is getting louder and louder. But I think really, and that's why it's wonderful to have you here today, I think you challenged the audience with your presentation up in Edinburgh about, we're very good at talking to ourselves about why golf is great, but what we don't do a great job at the moment, it can do a lot better, is how do we get that message out to that wider population that possibly have never heard about golf, have never experienced golf, have never even considered golf because of some of those, let's say, traditional perceptions of the game and why it might not be for them. So I think the way that you look to challenge the audience there about what narrative we use, I thought was really, really thought-provoking. So do you just want to explain a little bit more about your thought process behind that challenging question that you addressed?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, firstly, it was a great honour to be able to actually present at one of the congresses, having been to them and been, obviously enjoyed going and, like you say, learn a lot. There's so much packed into 1 or 2 days of presentations and different workshops that it's hard not to come away with just, in a nice way, be a little bit overwhelmed by the positivity and all the kind of stuff. I also think there's one of the sort of strokes of genius, if you like, is aligning the golf and health part with a more medical-based conference. So it was at the same time as the orthopaedic surgery or orthopaedic surgeons conference, and so I enjoyed the chance to kind of stand in a room of people, a few people that I recognised who were fully on board, but also a number of kind of NHS and private surgeons and people who are not golfers or at least are fay with it, and be able to present to them. But the reason for mentioning that particularly is because it exemplified what we're trying to get across, really, is that, as you rightly say, I think we're very good at talking to ourselves. As I say, if you went down to your local golf club and asked them about it, I feel like, I know to a degree, and I feel like there's a sort of penetration of that messaging through. And a big part of that has been through PGAs and national federations or unions, because at the end of the day, whether we like it or not, they tend to be the roots in for this kind of messaging. And obviously that gets pushed down from the top by people, by the likes of the RNA and the USGA as well. But I think the connection between that messaging or what we're trying to get across and the greater public, obviously lots of different groups within that, is really our next step. That's really what we need to get through more. And my presentation was, I suppose, representative of that, in that I was using examples of research that's very academic research, as it kind of should be, but that kind of stopped, for me, a couple of steps early. It often stops at abstract/conclusion. These are the technical things, and here's a bit of a summary for it. But what does it mean? And that's the big question. What does that mean to me as a person working in golf? What does that mean to a golf coach? What does that mean to yourself, Anthony, who's working in this kind of project arena, actually at the coalface? And that's often where it falls down. And so there's 2 steps, I suppose, or 2 parts within it. Is one, building the right messaging for those groups, and then actually the delivery of that down to them. And so standing in front of a room of surgeons in particular, I knew, and sort of, research people, academics within golf and health space, I went quite heavy into behavioural science stuff.
Yeah.
Tried to throw in as many figures as I can, as there is a lot of research in that area. And just a brief idea of it, it was looking at what are the behavioural, or what could be the behavioural principles behind creating messaging. So if you look at a message like the one that's really stood out and has probably gone furthest, is that golfers live 5 years longer. If you're listening to this and you don't already know that, one, I'd be a little bit surprised, but that's okay. But 2, that is the thing maybe to remember, if nothing else, is that golfers live 5 years longer. They actually live even a little bit longer if they're better, but that's not the be all and end all, as we know. It's about, literally it's about being involved and taking part, and not performance. But that message has a lot of kind of behavioural principles behind it, a big one being kind of loss aversion. The fact that if you live 5 years longer, that means I'm losing potentially 5 years on average if I'm not doing it. I'm missing out on these benefits if I'm not doing it. And it's that kind of view that I would like people, not just academics, but people to maybe have a think about around this area. If you're producing research, or if you're taking that research or those information and applying it in your marketing, messaging, whatever it might be, making a poster for a golf club, whatever it is, using some of these principles can be very helpful. We use them, and it's nothing special really, because we use them for everything. They're out there. Everything we do is based around these behavioural principles. Things like defaulting is a big behavioural principle. So within the UK, we have now a changed default in our pension scheme. So you would default to start saving. You have to actually go away and opt out of that. That's a behavioural principle, which results in more people saving. To use a completely non-golf example, but it's everywhere. And being just a little bit aware of these things, and I say a little bit of knowledge makes you dangerous. I think if you know those little things, when you write an Instagram post, if you're running a golf club Instagram or whatever, whatever it might be, thinking about those things can actually possibly have a big effect. And the other part to that, and this is something Anthony and I, we talk about this a lot, is how do you apply those messages to different types of people?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if you're a policymaker within a government, you don't necessarily want the touchy-feely stuff. You want to know how much money it's going to save you, really, in terms of either, reducing the healthcare burden that someone might have if they don't need to, if we talk about strength and balance. If someone's a bit stronger, has greater balance, less likely to be a full risk. If they're a full risk, that could cost, in the UK, the National Health Service, a lot of money. So if they're doing activity, in this case maybe doing golf, they're a bit stronger, the greater balance, less likely to cost the NHS money in the long run. Fantastic, that's what they care about. But the golfers live 5 years longer one is a good example, because, as I say, to different groups it means different things. To a policymaker, and Roger Hawkes was always sort of used this one as an example as well. Policymakers don't necessarily want to know about people living longer, although of course they want people to live longer, but living longer means more cost of services. It's about quality of life. So if they're living longer, yes, fine, there might be 5 years extra health care that they need, but it would be much less severe than living shorter and having physical or mental disorder that is extremely costly at the end of the day. So it's about understanding who you're targeting that to, and I think a big thing we're all guilty of and we could all be better of, and us at Golf and Health Project, we're going to try and work on this as well, is tailoring that message more. And yes, there's a time and a place for a quote unquote blanket message, but I think we can all be better at tailoring it. Who are we trying to get this across to? And we did it a little bit with the Golf and Health Resources. The Resource Centre, this is the plug, golfandhealth.org is the website for that. And anyone can sign up for free and access resources. And it's already categorised by kind of policymakers or clubs or facilities, to use a more generalised term, or coaches and that kind of stuff. Because it's different to different people. And so it's about what's the message you're trying to get across, who's the person at the other end, and what can you do. The thing that always comes back to my mind, our former chairman at PGAs of Europe, now CPG, was Sandy Jones, who was the chief executive of the British PGA for many years. I remember the first time I met him was at the Open before I started the role, and he said, well, communications to me is simple. You've got a person who gives out the message and you have a receiver, and as long as you're thinking about both, you're on to a winner. And I think that's absolutely right, but we generalise too often. And so it's about thinking about who is that person we want to get at the end, and if that's speaking to doctors about recommending golf as something, well then we've got to be understanding what the challenges they face, who they're dealing with, that kind of stuff, which is very, very different to a golf pro who's looking to sell lessons to get someone to be better at playing. And that's understanding that and then applying some of those principles, hopefully, is a good mechanism.
Absolutely. And I always now find that working in this space, we've got to speak so many different languages. I speak a different language now when I'm talking to health and social care stakeholders.
Exactly.
To golf industry stakeholders.
That's right.
To informal carers, to social care providers.
Exactly.
To care home providers, and all of those audiences, because you're quite right, we're very good sometimes at giving generic language, but tailoring it to an audience that will trigger and spark an interest is where I think we, and you're quite right to say, as an industry and outside the industry, we need to focus a lot more on is making sure that that spark leads to an interest in giving this wonderful game a go. We know that once we've got them sparked and inspired, no matter what challenge they're facing in life, all of a sudden they've discovered that new sense of purpose in their life, a new sense of belonging. They've got new friends, they've got a new sport that they never even thought that they would play. Beautiful green spaces to go to, beautiful clubhouses with fantastic hospitality. But for me, the first thing is really making sure that the wider population, no matter what challenge they're facing in life, has got a message in front of them, wherever that comes from, or whoever it comes from, that sparks them to say, you know what, I might give that a go. And I think that is where I'm going to be very passionate about making sure that we get more sparks into more people's lives. But experts like yourself who can look at how we package that messaging are absolutely critical to making sure that we get it to that audience and actually get those golf and health benefits adopted at scale across communities.
Yeah, exactly. You're absolutely, triggers the exact right word, and that's where it ties into this behavioural bit. I haven't really fleshed this out as much as I want to, but I'm a big believer that there's, we can deal with things like increasing general golf participation through looking more at behaviour, and it's triggers and motivation. What's the motivation for someone to do X, Y, Z? And that's why behavioural science, behavioural economics is the synonym, if you like, or part of that. It's sort of creating output that is disproportionate to the amount that is put in, and being a little bit clever with how we trigger things and finding these motivations. And I think again, we can probably identify the motivations of golfers much more easily than we can elsewhere, and find those triggers and activate them in clever and interesting ways.
Absolutely.
And we need to do a lot more of that. There needs to be some research, but for me it's quite practical research. It's not necessarily. It's further away from your standard academic research. It's more kind of, we just need to get out there and create a lot of messages and see what hits home. I think there's a big argument to say let's just get that out there, because there's a huge benefit to just doing that in the first place, and then we can find what is landing, what's landing with different groups of people, and what gets through to that wider population in different ways.
And I think that's really, really important you mention that, because I think it's about the message, but it's also who delivers that message.
Completely. Yeah.
Because, I've spoke to a lot of people about, potentially engaging a more diverse population within our Golfing Society programs. And I'll be honest with you, I really have not achieved that one goal. I think we're very inclusive, but there are certain audiences that we still can't engage with.
Yeah.
But I look at myself, I look at my background, and do I talk like some of those audiences we want to engage with? Do I really understand their culture, their trigger points?
Yeah.
And, I think that's something we've got to be very, very clever about going forward, and honest with ourselves that we need people who look like, who talk like, who understand those populations to really deliver that message, to get it through, to say, you know what, quite like what he's just said to me, I think I might give that a go. And I think that is something we've not been great at. So, as you know, we're great about collaborating, so I'm already talking to Coach Ray from the British Black Golf Association, thinking about, how we can collaborate with him and his organisation to make sure that community engages with the Golfing Society programmes. Because we're specialists in some of the conditions that we support, but we're not engaging with certain parts of society, and I think that's where collaboration in the messaging can really work well.
Yeah, it has to be. I think we've discussed it before, I guess many times, is that we're all often most of the time pulling in the same direction, and we need to kind of all, I guess a bugbear of mine is that it self-interest, it sounds much more negative than I mean it, but that tends to often be a primary driver, or obviously people need to look out for themselves. But easy for me to say, but for us at CPG, our view is all about collaboration. We know we can't do everything, can't be all things to all people, and so you need to work with other people to keep moving the ship forward. And you're absolutely right. We fall into our own silos as well. If we're focusing particularly around golf pros and that kind of stuff, and not the amateur golfer, well, we're not dealing with the whole piece of the puzzle. It's all very well educating golf pros in X, Y, Z, particularly in kind of this area, but there's also big space and big opportunity to be doing the same for amateur golfers, or just your casual golfer. So I think you're absolutely right. We need to collaborate much more than we already do, and I think we also kind of need to align the strategy, and I don't think that's often done enough, or not very popular, because obviously you need to make sure your own stuff is getting sorted and that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, what's the strategy? Well, the strategy is to really is to make people's lives better, enhance people's lives, and that might be by getting them to go out and play 18 holes a week, but it might be just to turn up and have a nice time and a nice chat at a golf facility, for example. Or actually it might just be, you know what guys, any form of physical activity is probably quite good for you anyway. So.
Absolutely, and I think one of the things that we've found is that if you take golf on the road and you take it out into the community and you actually deliver the message and the experience on their doorstep, in their community, then that's where that engagement is better, because we found it. As you know, we do golf sessions in care homes, in community settings, and we found that within those settings, the audience is a broader audience from all sorts of different backgrounds and cultures and everything else. And that's where we find that our message resonates to that wider audience about what's available at the local venue. So basically, they can either have the experience and enjoyment in a community setting, or they can actually come to venue and experience it there as well. So they get the best of both worlds. Yeah. But we found that getting people to give the golf venue a go is much more successful when you've taken it out into the community and they've had their first experience there. Yeah. So I think we've got to think about what that experience looks like there as the first opportunity to discover this wonderful game we call golf. And I always say that, imagine you're an alien and you've landed on planet golf and you've never been here before. Now we all know that as an alien landing here for the first time, you wouldn't have all of those preconceived ideas about what golf is about. But if you arrive at a traditional golf club, sometimes is the first experience, the first touch point always great? Is the welcome always great? Do you know where to go? How to sort of navigate that space? And when you talk to the people, are those people really embracing you from that first moment into their environment? And I would have to say that, I visited a lot of golf clubs, and some I find the warm welcome brilliant, and others I think it's a little bit cold, and possibly if I was an alien coming to this planet for the first time, I probably might think, you know what, this isn't the place for me. I'm going to go to planet X, Y or Z, but this isn't the one for me. And I think we've really got to think about when people land on our planet golf, what does that first experience or touch point look like? And if we get that right, then we've got a chance. But if we get it wrong, we won't change that individual into someone who's going to give this game a go. They might walk away and never come to us again.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this to you before, I think from a coaching perspective, soft skills are more important than theory and technical and that kind of stuff. I've learnt that time and seen it, and I've learnt that over the time that I've been involved in this area of the sport. I think that should really be the emphasis, and a lot of it is, you can say it's coaching because you might be able to deliver a lesson, but it's hospitality. It's creating warm environments, welcoming environments, exciting and fun environments. And often it can be quite flat. It can be actually quite a negative experience for a lot of people, and that's just the coaching bit sometimes. And then facilities again. It doesn't matter whether it's a PGA Pro or anyone, whoever's doing it. You're absolutely right. You've got to think about that, and not only think about that, but from different types of people as well, how different people would approach it. I think a lot of private clubs will be very used to, well, this is the type of person that comes to visit us because we're private effectively. That doesn't mean they shouldn't be thinking about, like say, even simple things like signage. If you're a private club and everyone's a member, well, they should know where to go. But what happens if one of their family members comes with them? Well, they won't know where to go. And it's super simple stuff, but I just don't think it's ingrained in us enough yet. There's obviously a lot of work that's being done to help that, but I definitely think there's more. And then just to touch on what you mentioned as well, that a big thing I think is just generally in terms of golf development overall, it's the perception and the perceptions of non-golfers of golf. And what we see, because we work across so many different countries, is that the newer the country is, obviously the perception is very different, but generally it's in a completely positive way. It's a lot more neutral. It seems to be, because they've got less tradition and perhaps some of the more negative things that people have focused on about that tradition, they're a bit more forward thinking, or places are just more community hubs as opposed to a golf specific facility. And I think we have a lot to learn from these newer countries. I think they're able to go out there and develop stuff without the burden of tradition and history of what's been done before. It's always been done like that, and I think that's to their benefit. I mean, we were very lucky a few months ago to visit the PGA of Iceland, and it's a golf facility just outside of Reykjavik, and it's got something like 10 TrackMan simulators in the basement. Those are all under snow, but the place was rammed. But it's a community hub. It's not just got hardcore golfers that are there. And the feeling about it was more of a non-golf facility with golf in it. And I think that's, there's a lot to be said for that. But that's, maybe going down a slight sidetrack. But the point being is creating these experiences that are much more welcoming. And also, I think there's a leadership role around that, particularly again in my space. PGA professionals can have a leadership role in laying this down. They can educate themselves about what is good. They can educate themselves about how to deal with visitors, players of different types. I mean that very broadly. There'll be disabled players or people with various different conditions, or they might just be from different ethnic backgrounds, different demographics. And I think people need to understand how to deal with them. Just like we were saying earlier about tailoring your message, I think you need to learn how to tailor yourself to the people around you or coming into your business.
Absolutely.
And that does not happen enough.
No. And I think that's very, very interesting, and a nice little segue into the next part of our conversation, because the messaging, I think we've got to think about the different mediums that we use as well, because certain people engage better with certain communication than others. I mean, for instance, I'm much better as a visual learner or an audio learner. Written is difficult for me because of my dyslexia. So, and also the actual wording that we use, I think we need to be really, really clever and make sure that messaging is totally inclusive. And I know that we've come a long way in terms of making sure that it is inclusive messaging, but I think we can do a lot more in terms of making it feel real, making it relevant, and making it totally engaging and interactive for people with neurodiversity, certain visual impairments, hearing impairments, whatever they may have. I think we really need to be a bit better at those nuances of getting the actual mediums that we use right.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think imagery is a massive, there's a whole piece just on imagery. We were talking a little bit earlier on about yourself being reflected in things. That's one of the behavioural principles, and how you want to look, or how you do look, as in look and feel, who you are. Being able to see that in things like golf marketing, golf club marketing, whatever that might be. Imagery is massive in that, and there's a huge space to be doing more with that, where it is more reflective of who we are generally, but also who you're targeting.
Absolutely.
And I think from, if you're talking about what are the media outlets or those kinds of things, how do you get your message out there? there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of things that are out there that could confuse your message or just, get in the way or whatever it is. And I would flip that on its head and say, actually, we've got more ways of targeting people. And I mean targeting in a nice sense, and getting them the person that we'd like to listen to this message, getting it to them. Using technology, using different platforms and things, I think is of real benefit. But again, a big, huge thing that I keep coming back to is simply the awareness when creating anything like this. Simply having the awareness of the fact that it might be viewed by someone who's neurodiverse, or someone who maybe has English as a second language. If you're, dealing with an ethnic minority, for example, or just dealing with something that's across borders, multinational. Having that understanding to begin with is already ticking. I don't know, ticking the box or getting you maybe 75% along the way. It's awareness, it's understanding that. I think if you're not understanding that, you're already falling at the first hurdle. Having that in the back of your mind is enabling you to then maybe write something or come up with something like that. So I think we could probably, from an education perspective, probably do a better job of explaining that to people. Again, my world is golf pros, golf coaches in particular, PGA members, giving them some skills to be able to assess who the audiences are, take a step back and look at who am I trying to appeal with. Yes, I've got to create a marketing message, but who's it for? Who could see it? There's a lot more that can be done, but again, having that base awareness that this could be a thing is possibly the biggest tip. It's just being a little bit aware of that, and then you can start to apply. Then we can start to do some fun things with technology where we've had a little play even today with artificial intelligence, ChatGPT. You can now put something in there and say, look, this is the thing, this is the message, let's just call it a singular message, whatever that might be. How might I need to adapt this to someone who's neurodiverse, or to someone who may not be able to understand this in English written form? And it will do a lot of the legwork for us now, which is massive. And those tools and things are going to become more and more inbuilt into everything we do. And I don't think they're really anything to be scared of, because to me, if it might not be 100% right all the time, but if it can give me a little pointer towards, actually, do you know what, tweak that word and you're golden.
Absolutely.
And you're off and flying, to me that's amazing. That's really helpful. So I don't think we should shy away from that. I actually think we should start to properly embrace those things, because they will be doing the work that I can't do either on my own or as an individual.
I think that's a great insight, that, and I think you're right. Embrace that technology, let it help you, tweak it accordingly, give it that human touch, and collectively that can really work in terms of getting the right message out. But I'm quite excited about the future, and the reason I'm excited about the future is that we know what a great message the golf and health message is. We know what a great game golf is to play from 1 to 101. There aren't many sports that you can play from cradle to grave.
Exactly right.
And this is, I'm so glad I found it. I had my first experience when I was just back on holiday visiting my dad, and he said, Anthony, do you fancy a game of golf? Well, I was football and cricket mad at that time. I hadn't even played golf. I thought it was for old men, who had loads of money. Not that my dad had loads of money, but that was my perceptions of it. And that first day I actually got marched off the golf course because I was wearing short white socks, not knee-length socks. So my first experience wasn't a great one.
No.
But I actually thought, you know what, because I was mad about sport, when I come back to the right club with the right people, I might quite enjoy this, because I actually hit a few good golf balls. I thought, I quite like this. So I'm so glad that I discovered that, because I can't imagine a day without sport in my life. And golf has given me that and so much more in spades. I've had a few wobbles in my life with my stroke and a few little wobbles, but golf has been my happy place. It's got, when I've felt as though life is getting on top of me, then it's my place to go to get what I call my emotional equilibrium back. And I don't think there are many spaces and places or sports that actually give that. And I think that message, if we can just package that up to those different audiences, and then inspire our health and social care professionals to embrace this golf and health agenda, then it's probably the easiest thing to prescribe to anybody facing a challenge in life, because you can get in the outdoors, you can learn a new skill, you can find new friends, you free parking, which always goes down well at golf clubs, well, mostly anyway, and basically you've got something that you can get out of bed and look forward to doing every week, and sometimes more than once a week. And even if you just do it on the putting green, even if you just have a cup of coffee in the clubhouse, golf venues can facilitate this healthy, happier life that we all aspire to. And I think that I talk passionately about it now because I'm in this, but when I speak to people living with a long-term health condition, when I speak to a health and social care stakeholder that maybe doesn't get golf, that's what I try and inspire them to do, to think differently about it and to give it a go. And I always say that the best way to experience what we do and the benefits that our programmes bring in terms of golf and health is to come and see us live. And I think we need to encourage more people in the general community, either people living with those conditions or people supporting them to live better, to come and see these golf programmes in action, and then they get what a profound impact they have on people's health and well-being, really. And I think that's, with your expertise, with all the great research we've got out there at the minute, that's what we've got to package up and get in front of those audiences, because I don't think any sport other than golf is as well placed to play a major role in this whole drive to get more preventive programs and sort of interventions in place than golf.
I think we need to find a way to distill you down into more.
I'll get off my soapbox now,
into
audience.
More ambassadors and people that will mention that. And I mean, genuinely, I think that's one of the challenges in a sense, is that a bit what we said earlier. Golf, we know. Again, if we go out now onto the veranda and speak to some of the guys and girls who've just finished playing, and they know why it's so good. How do we package that enjoyment, that fun, that these benefits, the ones that we're researching, and now we have researched, we've kind of got what we need in many sense. We know that it's good and it's proven. How do we package that up and create Anthony Blackburns out of it and get people out there sharing that message to the non-golf audience? I definitely think there's big progress being made in how we do that, but that's kind of what I would implore to people is, how can you take your passion and then get that communicated to someone else? And a big part of it is that communication piece, and then a big part of it's what we talked about before. Okay, I completely agree. If you get people in the environment, they get it. Even if it's the first time they've ever touched golf, they kind of get it. So if you can create the welcoming environments that will facilitate that to start off with, and then the method to get them in, we could be flying. We could be doing really well, and that's. There's no single thing that it works. The communications piece is working hand in hand with the education side of things, and that's educating, whether it's club staff, managers, golf pros, coaches, whoever it is, at the facility to understand that, and then looking wider, policymakers, the doctors, health practitioners of all kinds at all different types of levels. How do we give them some tools and skills where they can, I suppose, express their passion and their understanding for these things in the right way that it gets people in? That's maybe oversimplifying the challenge a little bit, but still, it would be.
Well, I'm going to give you a little challenge now. You mentioned earlier one of the key things that really has got out there, and that golfers generally live 5 years longer than non-golfers. So that's one of your little takeaways. Another couple maybe that you would sort of give to people. So obviously you're going to live longer. I think the ones that I always go back to, if I put myself into a scenario where I'm talking to probably one of my family members who doesn't play golf, and they're either asking me why I like it, or I'm trying to encourage them to come with me, which happens a lot.
live 5 years longer, and if you're a little bit better at it, which is always a good message, and that's what we're trying to push to golf coaches in particular, is that if someone's better, they might even live a little bit longer, which is great news for golf pros, because if they can coach people to be a bit better, that's brilliant. Not the be all and end all, but certainly a good thing. That is a key one. The other one is just health enhancing activity. That little phrase has stuck with me for a long time. So one of the things Andrew and Roger did a great job of is getting golf to be officially globally recognised as health enhancing activity. That suddenly puts golf onto the agenda, or on a list of stuff that is good for you for XYZ reason. And that phrase basically encompasses stuff like you're going to get probably your 10,000 steps in a day, which is proven to be beneficial for many reasons. You can argue whether it should be 8 or 12 or whatever, but the point is you're getting out there, and the step count is really important. But it's also then reducing risk of at least 40 different kind of disorders, diseases, etc. You're lowering, because it's health enhancing, therefore we know that it is going to lower your stroke risk or your heart disease risk, some cancers risk and all that kind of stuff, because we can assign what golf does really well to this colossal body of research out there about health enhancing activity. And also things like, because it's at a lower pace, its accessibility to do that. So I always focus on this because it's, I guess in a nice way, a bit of a catch-all. It's a catch-all way of saying, do you know what? It'd be great if you could go out there and just walk. You know, that's one of the things, I'm sure you've said it many times before. If you're going to do nothing else, just go out there and do some walking, because that's really, really good for you. But why not go out there and do some walking and have a game at the same time, and do it with one of your mates and talk and, you know, be in a safe space and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And so 5 years longer, this kind of reduction of risk of all these chronic diseases, health enhancing. And then the other one is green space. For me, is green space is it is one of these big key things. Again, scientifically proven, the colour green, being in the open air, fresh air, a wide environment, it has untold benefits. So again, if someone's going to get out there and do anything, walk, and ideally if you're going to walk in a nice green space where it's nice and relaxing. But golf just ticks those boxes as being great. So those are the three things I always go back to as kind of straight off the shelf, good to go. And I guess I can do that because of the work of the likes of Andrew and Roger and all those other great health professionals or research professionals who've done that research. I can say that with confidence now. We, maybe 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would say that it's probably good for you because there's a load of walking and you're outside. Now we've got this backing up, and that's why I can speak so passionate about it. And it's about, just getting out there and staying active, but why not do it in a golf environment? It's so much fun,
Well, I love the fact you called it health enhancing, and that it can contribute to, addressing 40 different at least 40 different conditions. And the fact you're doing it in green space and you're doing it with other people. Yeah. So basically, I package all of that up, and the takeaway I got from that is golf is a bit of a wonder drug.
Correct.
So if that was on prescription, surely people would be wanting to take that tablet as opposed to maybe the tablets related to 10 morbidities, 4 morbidities,
exactly.
6 morbidities that they may have. If you've got something like the health enhancing benefits of golf, that is, considering it's not a prescriptive drug, I think one of the most amazing things out there.
It is. And I think that's part of the challenge in some ways, because people are kind of, how can doing that cover
Sounds
all those
too good
things?
to be true.
Sounds too good to be true, exactly. But that's what we need to get out there is, and I think where we're seeing golf on prescription come in, where GPs or medical professionals are able to kind of, in inverted commas, officially push people towards golf.
Yeah.
As long as you then have the other side of the connection, the facilities, the welcoming facilities, those pathways for people to come across, that's how we're going to do it.
Mm.
And it's getting those pieces of the puzzle in place first, because the connection is almost there instantaneously. But so I think the physical activity is where it's at, and golf happens to be a physical activity that can achieve most of these things for more people for longer. You could argue that someone, if they're going out there and playing some football every week, they're achieving some health enhancing activity that's fantastic, but just as you said, they can't do that from 1 to 101, and that's where we stand out. That's where, one of the things I've always loved to do is play with different ages of people and that kind of stuff. When I started playing golf, I'd go out with my dad, who I guess at the time would have been 40 or something, and I was sort of 5 or 6, and we'd be playing with people who are 70 or 80 and whatever, and you're just mixing. Those benefits are the things we need to get across. And I also think there's kind of, maybe this is a side idea or whatever, but you've got huge numbers of people playing these other sports that are either highly physical, fast, possibly even maybe runners that the impact of these sports and stuff is maybe too much for their bodies as they age. We can be the second sport. We're the second sport for a lot of people. We're the second sport for a lot of sportsmen and women. So why can't we be the kind of second sport and find a way in that way as well? Look, yeah, you love football. You might not be able to play football anymore because you can't keep up or your joints can't take it, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just what happens. Here's an alternative. You can still keep your competitive edge. You can still do all these things. You still get your health enhancing activity and those kinds of things. So yeah, maybe that's a side point, but yeah, it's a bit of a, I think is the right word would be panacea. Is that the right word, or a big thing?
Yeah.
Dr. Danny Glover used that in an interview I did with him the other day, and it keeps sticking in my mind. He's much cleverer than I am, so he probably understands it better. But it could be this thing, and I think easy for me to say because this is the bit that I'm involved in. But I can imagine really that a lot of the getting that across to people, it really is a comms thing. That's what the comms challenge is. I think 10 years ago it was a research challenge because we needed to prove it, and we've done a lot of that. There's a lot of stuff that can still be done, don't get me wrong, but we have proven a lot of that, a huge body of evidence now, and now it's about communicating it down to as many people as we can. And if they don't want to play golf, hey, no problem, but we're exposing the benefits to them. And if they go, well, I'm not going to play golf, but yeah, I'm going to go and walk in, great, I'm happy with that.
Well, Aston, that's been a fantastic conversation. I've enjoyed every moment of that, and it's good to be thought-provoking with the audience as well, because you're quite right. We've done all the research, but what we haven't done is a great job yet in getting the messages out. And this conversation today hopefully will have sparked a few ideas as to people working in this healthy aging space, the golf space, as to how they can maybe think again about the narrative, what they say, how they say it, who they say it to, and the mediums and everything else that they use. And I've loved every minute of this conversation today, and I just want to finish with one last thing.
Yeah.
And if you could give the audience one key takeaway in terms of getting a message out there, what would that takeaway be?
That's easy. Find out some or a health benefit that the sport gives us. So let's just go with golfers live 5 years longer, and tell that to one other person who doesn't play golf. I mean, if you do that, you have a cumulative effect of someone else understanding that golf is good for you and could change it. As I said before, if someone wants to, we can't force anyone to play golf. You can't force anyone to do it, and if people like it, they like it. If they don't, they don't. But if they understand that it is health enhancing, that it has this benefit and a whole host of others, if you want to explain it to them as well, if they get that, everything else kind of makes sense. If they then in 10 years time go to a GP surgery and the GP goes, have you considered golf actually, instead of we need to keep your mobility going, we want to get you out there, we want you to have some more social interaction, have you considered golf? They're going to get it. There's going to be some contextual awareness, there's going to be some memory that they have of, oh yeah, my friend or one of my family members plays it and loves it. I think we talk about ambassadors a lot and that kind of stuff. We are the ambassadors. It's not rocket science to me. We are the ambassadors, and a little bit of knowledge is dangerous. That's what I said earlier. If you know a little bit, a couple of the health benefits, tell someone who doesn't know them, who's ideally outside of the game. It's normalising that golf is a good thing. You might even change the perceptions along the way if more and more people get it. That to me is quite a powerful thing to do, and I try myself whenever I go anywhere. I try and if I speak to someone who's non-golf, I go to have my hair cut, and the person cutting my hair asks me what I do or whatever, and I tell them, but I always throw in a benefit. I always throw in that actually, it's really good for you, and they might go, I have no idea, and that it's tiny, it's free, it takes 2 seconds, but if you can do that, I think that's hopefully quite
well. That's perfect. So the audience, just go and tell one more person, and that's the key way to get this message and momentum started, really. So once again, Aston, thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks, Anthony. I just want to throw in right at the end as well is that you mentioned right at the beginning that I was very lucky to come up and with Roger and see you and the project in action. And maybe your listeners are preaching to the converted already, but it was really quite powerful to me to see in person. So again, what we've talked about actually going to an environment and seeing it in action, that really, at the end of the day, that has the biggest effect. It's also quite hard to do, but it has the biggest effect. But what you've been able to do over a number of years is astounding, and is something that we need to get out there more and more. And the thing that really, there's two things that really struck me. Was one, I heard lots of stories about how individuals with dementia who basically had gone into themselves, it's just one of the things that happens, were able to come out of their shell again and to be seen to become maybe a bit more like their old self, even if it's just for an hour or two. That was incredible, because that to me exemplifies what we've just talked about, the power of golf and those benefits. It may be a bit more overt, but it shows it. And then the other thing was the secondary benefit, the carers. I had not, until I'd seen that in action, appreciated, and not having much experience myself in that kind of world, had appreciated just how impactful that is. And anyone listening to this who's not fully aware of the outcomes, if you like, of golf in society, or just in general, the benefit the carers get is as good as those taking part in the golf bit. The chance for them to take a breath and get a bit of a rest and see their loved one in action, but actually, not be on edge or just be, in full action mode as they tend to be a lot of the time, was just incredible. And it's something that I think about regularly, and it's something that I want to try and get across more and more. And I think if more people, whether that's PGA pros doing it or just golf and health ambassadors at a club or whoever, can get behind that and share that idea, I think that could be incredibly impactful, and you should only be congratulated. And we love it every time we see something. We love it, and if anyone gets a chance to see it in action, they've got to go and check it out, because it really is. It's probably the most powerful thing I've seen golf do, and I've seen a lot of golf stuff, put it that way.
Wow, audience, I wasn't really expecting that, but thank you very much for those kind words. And yeah, big shout out to those unsung heroes of society, the unpaid carers.
Yeah.
And as long as we continue with golf in society, that will always be very, very close to our hearts, making sure that they get the happier, healthier lives that they deserve, whilst they're doing the amazing job of looking after their loved ones. So let's finish with a big shout out to those unsung heroes out there, the unpaid carers.
Absolutely.
Aston, thanks for your time.
Thank you, Anthony. Hopefully future Anthony Blackburn MBE or something like that, I'm sure. But thank you. Thanks for having me.